Thank you for joining me today. Obviously, I've had some difficulties getting content up this week. It's just been super hectic and stressful for both me and for my girlfriend who does the editing for these videos. You know, I don't want to go into all the details and everything. I'm sure most people probably don't care anyway. I apologize that this is literally the first probably video that's going to go up this week, and it's likely not going to go up until mid-morning. So since it's a holiday right now, since it's Thanksgiving, there's not a whole lot of new news to talk about. Anything that I think is worth covering would be a rehash at this point in time. I want to talk about something else I find a bit intriguing, kind of step a little bit outside my wheelhouse. Now, I have covered the law plenty of times, and I have covered criminal cases in the past, but today I want to talk about serial killers. I want to talk about unsolved, specifically American serial killings, because the other thing that I want to talk about, and the thing that I want to tie this into, is how modern developments in both investigative technologies and changes in culture and the way that these cases are handled in the broader public may lead to some of these long unsolved cases finally receiving closure over the next couple of years. Now, the one case that put me onto this idea was the Zodiac killer. Now, while this case does remain unsolved, I found it amazing how prolific of a community has sprung up around people discussing the details of this case and kind of speculating on it. Just in case you have been down a rabbit hole for the last few decades, the Zodiac Killer is very well known in America for a couple of interesting reasons. He has 7 known victims attributed to him to a certainty. 2 of those did survive the attacks. Of those 7 victims, 6 of them were part of a couple wherein one man and a woman were attacked simultaneously. The last one was a cab driver by the name of Paul Stine, who was shot in 1969. Now, the Zodiac Killer is also famous for sending these messages to taunt the Bay Area press, and specifically sending these odd ciphers or encoded messages, 4 of which are known to have come from him, and only 1 of which has been solved to this day, to the best of my ability to discover. Now, while these killings, which mostly date back over 50 years at this point, probably would be largely ignored by the police in the past, these huge online sleuther communities that have kind of built up around cases like this still contain thousands of people who are discussing the details of this case, people who are working on trying to find that thing that will lead to being able to definitively prove who this guy was. And while nobody has definitively identified the Zodiac Killer to this point, there have been a lot of interesting examples of people linking other victims to him, because while there are 7 known victims of the Zodiac Killer, he himself claims to have been involved in as many as 37 different killings. And continued investigation into this case has been able to form likely ties between the Zodiac Killer and victims that put his killing spree as far back as 1963, 5 years before his first confirmed victims, and also expand the geographical region from just Northern California to as far away as Nevada. And with the advances in modern technology, both on the side of communications between police forces and individual citizens with an interest in these cases, and the advancement of investigative technologies, I find it really unlikely that this case will remain unsolved forever. Even if, in all likelihood, by the time it actually is solved, the culprit is long dead. But there are at least 2 definite examples that I have been able to find just in the last couple of years where somebody has been caught or even convicted on serial killings that have been cold for decades. And both of these cases, the final breaks came from a combination of cooperation with the internet and with the general public, and continued digging into these circumstances, as well as advancement in investigative technologies and specifically DNA technologies. The case of the Grim Sleeper, or the Southside Slayer, was a series of serial killings committed between the years of 1985 and 2007. And infamously, during this 22-year window, this serial killer was well known to have taken about a 14-year break from his killings. Now, this case was finally solved, and finally led to a conviction and a death penalty sentence being given to one Lonnie David Franklin Jr. in 2016. But this is a case wherein, in 1985, when these crimes started occurring, this case likely would have gone unsolved and basically unrecognized for all time, were it not for continuous developments and advancements in the way that serial killings and crime in general was looked at. In addition to the changes or the developments that I mentioned previously, such as improved communications between law enforcement agencies and improved interaction with the public. Interestingly enough, one of the first changes that was needed for this case to make its way toward a final conviction was a social change. Because originally these murders were given the label NHI, or No Humans Involved. Now, ostensibly, this label was given to murders that involved prostitutes and habitual drug users as their victims. Just beneath the surface was the reality that this was also a tag given to murders of impoverished black women. And these cases were given very little actual investigation, very little effort was put into solving them. Now, when a group known as Black Women Count finally pressured law enforcement into taking a serious look at these cases, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department did make a statement in September of 1985, finally linking these cases together as the victims of a serial killing, although that was kind of backtracked on and muddled later, as we'll talk about in a second, with the serial killer originally being given the label of the Southside Slayer. The Grim Sleeper label would come much later on and was an epithet given to him due to his 14-year break from killing. Now, it is believed that this killer may have been responsible for as many as 25 or more killings, but there are definitely 10 that have been confirmed beyond a doubt. Now, even after the initial announcement of a serial killer and a real investigation being started in this case, there was a series of incidents and confusion where it wasn't quite certain which murders did and did not fit into this serial killer's actual spree, and there were several other people arrested in ones and twos on different murders here that were at one point attributed to the Southside Slayer. Additionally, there was an incident in which a sheriff's deputy was wrongfully arrested in the case due to some sort of ballistics mix-up. This deputy, Ricky Ross, was found in the car with a prostitute, and somehow his firearm was tested and inaccurately came back positive as matching the firearm used in the Southside Slayer killings. This was debunked quite quickly, but he was released from the police department, and from what I can find was never reinstated, although it does appear that he didn't ever bother to try and fight to be reinstated. The first major break in this case came in May of 2007, when DNA analysis was able to match DNA of the slaying of Janisha Peters to 11 unsolved murder cases. At this point, things started to snowball pretty quickly, with an LAPD task force being set up, and then a newspaper publication leaking to the public that a lot of the girls had been confirmed as victims of a serial killer. This was quickly followed up within a couple of years by the announcement of a $500,000 reward for details leading to the serial killer's capture, as well as a feature on America's Most Wanted. Finally, the recovery of a 911 call from the 1980s in which somebody reported seeing the Grim Sleeper dump a body and even was able to report the license plate number for the van he was driving, as well as testimony from the sole known survivor of the Grim Sleeper, Anitra Washington, were finally able to break this case open to the police. On July 7th of 2010, Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was finally arrested for these killings, and as I said earlier, he was convicted about 6 years later and sentenced to the death penalty. Now, while this case, I think, is much less well known than the Zodiac killer case, I think it so clearly demonstrates this idea that I'm trying to propose to you, right? If we look at this situation, from the way that it started in 1985, the police were not even really willing to investigate these killings. This man could have potentially done this forever and never been caught had things stayed the way that they were. It took a series of developments and changes. First, the cultural shift forced the LAPD and Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to put value on the lives of prostitutes and drug users and black women, really. Finally, forcing law enforcement to investigate these cases seriously and notice that they did likely have a serial killer on their hands. Later on, advancements in investigative technologies, and specifically DNA testing, combined with an ability to communicate details with the public and dig up old evidence like that 911 call that had been overlooked in the past, were finally able to close the book on this, link all these victims together, and give the police an actual suspect that they were able to then arrest and convict for these crimes. Another really high-profile example of this that we've all probably heard of in the last couple of years was the capture of the Golden State Killer, who again was arrested this year because of advancements in modern community and modern technology, where a genealogy website was able to be the key to finally putting away this killer who was responsible for unsolved murders dating back 40 years. The fact of the matter is that whether people realize it or not, with these advancements in technology, with the buzz that exists due to these internet sleuthing communities, and the ability of not only police departments, but common citizens to talk about these cases so freely, we have a situation where in a lot of these unsolved serial killing cases, the net is closing on these killers. Even if law enforcement didn't have the resources or clues or capabilities to solve these crimes when they were on their desk, the world itself and the advancing of time is closing the net. a lot of these guys will start to be caught over the next few years. And on top of these two major serial killers that have been caught because of this, there have been missing persons cases being solved, John Does and Jane Does being identified, singular murder cases finally catching a break, and so many other things that have been solved by a combination of these advancements in investigative technology and the advent of the internet and these true crime and sleuther communities that have formed as a result of people's interest in these situations. And while the Zodiac Killer has remained so vague and mysterious for all of this time and has held the public's interest, I think that will be eventually the key to his final discovery, because I think that as long as people are still interested in this, as long as people are still looking into this, eventually somebody will notice that thing that brings him and a lot of other serial killers who are still out there to justice. It's only a matter of time. You guys, don't forget, like this video and subscribe. Have a happy Thanksgiving weekend, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.